Number 1. Ever since I was a baby, I've lived in the same country home. It's always been a lovely place to live. It's beautiful, serene, and crawling with farm animals and wildlife. So basically an outdoorsy child's paradise. In 2007, my little brother was born, and everything around the house was normal until maybe mid-2010. Jake, my little brother, would always stumble around to one specific corner of the living room and just babble and laugh at seemingly nothing. We thought it was his first imaginary friend. No big deal. He would always refer to his friend as the Cowboy, and wouldn't really talk about him unless we pried information out of him. Like I said, we didn't really think of it as a big deal until we got our first puppy. Almost immediately as he first came home, he would sit and stare at the same corner and bark and wag his tail, and even roll on his back like he wanted his belly rubbed. This is when we started getting legitimately concerned. My mum and I have always been believers in the paranormal, but we've never had a true experience before this. Mum started asking Jake more and more things about his friend. Jake would refuse to say anything to her. Finally, my father had had enough about the whole thing and got Jake to tell us all about the Cowboy. This is what Jake said. The Cowboy used to live here before us. He has a grey shirt and has 2 shots here and here. He pointed to his arm and then his head. He says he doesn't like you, Daddy. He stays far away on the porch when you're here. He's mad we live on his farm. It's believed that animals and children have a stronger perception to spirits than adults. Whatever my baby brother saw was something we couldn't see or sense. Whoever or whatever the Cowboy is, I really don't want to ever stumble into him. Number 2. My family had a horse farm in a rural part of the US. To make some extra cash, we invited the public for trail rides. The terrain was mountainous and fairly rocky in some areas, and I like to take folks on some really steep trails. So, this one afternoon in late November, I was leading a trail ride. I was probably about 20 years old or so. I had about 4 or 5 people behind me, out for an hour-long holiday ride. I was leading the ride up over the crest of a heavily wooded ridge, and back down the steep rocky slope on the other side. The slope was so steep that the horses had to almost slide down on their bottoms, so it was very slow going. Just as the last person in the line had started down this slope, I saw a man running through the trees in front of us, probably about 60 yards ahead, and at an oblique angle away from us. All the leaves are off the trees, obviously, so I could see this guy clear as anything. He was wearing jogging shorts, a tank top, and no shoes on his feet, and he's running over this incredibly uneven and rocky terrain like the wind. No stumbling over tree roots or sharp stones hidden under the leaf litter, just running as if he was running over a flat, level road. He also wasn't disturbing the leaves under his feet at all, and yet he was definitely running very fast. That's all pretty weird. Here it had to be about 28 degrees outside, and we're all bundled up to our eyeballs. And this guy's running like a deer out in those woods, dressed for summer temperatures and barefoot. But what really got our attention, what raised every hair on my head and spooked my horse, is that the runner made no sound at all. Totally silent. I could see my mare's ears trembling with the strain of trying to pick up any sound. Add to that, as the man was running away from us at an angle and so swiftly, it was no time at all before we were looking at his back. But not the back of his head. His face was turned to us the whole time. He would have had to have been missing ligaments and cartilage in his neck to have accomplished that. Not once did that man take his eyes off us, even as his back was turned to us. We all watched the runner as he reached the bottom of the hill and started up the hill in front of us, still looking directly at us, and never having to change his pace, and continuing to run at the exact same constant speed. The entire scenario made no sense. All we could do was watch. And we watched him run straight up the next steep incline without breaking his step, all the while staring at us, until he disappeared over the ridge. We were all frozen and dumbfounded. All of us, even the horses. I finally turned around in my saddle and asked my riders behind me if they had seen the same thing. I probably needn't have bothered. The looks on their faces said it all. And, like my horse, their horses were all standing stock still, waiting to bolt hell-bent for leather back to the farm. Everyone just nodded dumbly, staring slack-jawed and wide-eyed, until someone near the back of the line broke the silence and said, "What in the name of all that is holy was that?" We all laughed, that small, nervous laughter at his question, and we resumed the ride. We continued on the trail we were on, seeing as the runner wasn't using the trail, or any trail anyway, and had darted off in another direction entirely. But man, was my head on a swivel for the rest of that ride. One of the odd things about that encounter was that I thought the runner resembled a man who boarded his horse with us, a man I'd known for most of my life. When I returned to the barn as the sun was setting, I saw him standing in the doorway. This man was from Abilene, Texas, a real leathery cowboy. I'd asked him if he'd been out in the woods a short while ago, riding or... well, I wasn't going to ask a tough-as-nails cowboy if he'd been out gallivanting around in jogging shorts and a tank top. A question like that would have earned me the look. But no, he hadn't been out riding late that afternoon. And understand this, I don't hold with any nonsense. I'm not one of those woo-woos who sees angels and ghosts around every corner. But, as cliche as this sounds, I have no explanation for it. Number 3. I was delivering pizza to a hospital one night, and I went in the doors that were on the delivery description. I wound up at a check-in desk where no one was around. Behind me were several recovery rooms, all with lights out. I looked around for anyone who might have placed the order, but ended up just hanging at the desk for a few more minutes. From the room directly to my right, I could hear a sad, weak voice say, "I just want to go home." I turned and saw a man with several tubes in and out of him. His lamp was faintly lit, and he was locking eyes with me. At that moment, the person who ordered showed up at the desk, and we did the little pizza exchange. As I turned around to leave, I looked into the room where the guy with the tubes was, and there was no one there. No light on, no tubes, and no sign that anyone had ever been using that bed. I made sure it was the correct room by pretending to forget which door was the exit, and I examined a few rooms in the area, all of which were empty. It still freaks me out. Number 4. About 2.5 years ago, after a really bad breakup, I moved into my childhood home where my grandmother lived before she died. On a side note, she didn't die in the home, nor is this story about her. One day I was pulling in to park my car, and my old neighbour, who still lived in the area, pulled up next to me in her truck, on my passenger side. We began to talk and catch up. I acknowledged her passenger, which was her father, and said things like, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" Or, "Where are you guys going?" Something like that. My neighbour paused briefly, but answered. I closed the conversation out and waved to both of them. Later that evening, I called my mother to tell her that I had seen the old neighbours, and that Mr. Tom didn't say much, which I had just assumed was due to him being so old and such. But I told her that he looked good. She pauses, and this is where I about shit bricks and build a castle. My mum says, Mr. Tom's been dead for 2 years now. I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. You never forget a face that you grew up with. Number 5. I was very young, around 2 or 3, and had an experience that still scares me to this day. My bedroom was at the back of our house against the alley. There were no fences, and for some reason I didn't have blinds. I did, however, have sheer white curtains. One morning, very early, probably around 4 AM, I was up in my room with the lights on and playing. I would normally get up very early so I could watch cartoons. This was 1983, so cartoons only came on very early. I remember a knock at my window, and today I describe the person there as looking like a witch, like one from The Wizard of Oz, green face and all. My window was open because we didn't have air conditioning and it was summer. I don't remember if I had a conversation with this witch. I just remember that somehow they knew my name and said, "You better be a good girl, or I'll come back for you." Obviously, this scared me immensely, and I ran to my parents' bedroom. My mum didn't believe me until the next day, when she went outside and saw her flowers trampled below my window. We didn't live there long, or really know anyone, so I can't explain this situation. It's always sat with me in my mind though, and even today, I'm frightened of being watched through my window. Hi guys, Lazy Masquerade here. I hope you enjoyed my first venture into paranormal territory. Email me your own ghost stories to have a chance of having it featured in the next episode. Stay spooky, and remember, the best things happen in the dark.